William Ruto, when you came to power, Africans celebrated you across the board because you were speaking the Pan-African language, and Africa is hungry for such leadership. But lo and behold, a few weeks later, a few months later, you were singing a different tune. Africans thought that they would see in you the mangoes of Pan-Africanism, but instead, they have seen the lemons of somebody who behaves like a puppet, somebody who dances to the tune of the highest bidder. That is something that has to stop. Before some of you begin to say that, are you now against Russia? I challenge you to just look at history. Look at, did Russia provide Lumumba with military support or not? Go back to history and dig for yourself. If you find that they didn't provide him with support, that should tell you something. And feel as if now we're against Russia. No, we are not against Russia. We are for Africa and every country that stands by Africa. Russia at the moment politically is standing by Africa, morally is standing by Africa. But we're saying that they have to step up their game in terms of standing by Africa economically. You know, Russia has signed 43 military agreements with African countries. But do you know how many economic agreements they have signed with African countries? They're not as many. They're not as elaborate. Russia at the moment can actually help Africa in terms of energy.
Yeah.
Even Ibrahim Traore himself told Vladimir Putin to his face when he met Putin a few weeks ago. Traore told him to his face that now we need skills transfer. But Traore himself, if Traore himself told Putin to his face that now Burkina Faso needs skills transfer, who are you to feel as if, are you then going to accuse Traore of being pro-West just because he's told Putin that?
Welcome to GhanaPlusTv, the digital heartbeat of Africans' truth. This is more than a channel. It is a movement. A space where African stories are told by African voice. Raw, rare, and unapologetic. From culture to current affairs. From untold story to breaking news. We bring you the narrative that matters. The ones mainstream media skips. The one that shapes our identity, our power, our future. If you are looking for truth, pride, and perspective, you are in a right place. Subscribe, like, share, and stay connected. Let's own our story together.
Now, I'm going to tell you a great story. It's a true story that provides an answer to that question. Sometimes in 2024, early 2024, Joe Biden reached out to William Ruto. And Joe Biden, on behalf of the United States of America, was already beginning to court Kenya to ensure that Kenya is that special country that the US can rely on, but if you want to put it bluntly, that the US can use, then eventually dump. So Joe Biden started reaching out, and then his emissaries asked Ruto's emissaries, we're thinking of inviting you people for a state dinner. It rarely happens. Being invited for a state dinner is a very, very special thing. It means that the US is looking at you as that special date. You're not just a normal date. You're a very special date. Yeah. So they reached out. And then they even wanted to find out, what music do you and the First Lady like? Ruto and the First Lady, through their emissaries, say that they like gospel music and they like country music. Because Joe Biden wanted to ensure that this dinner date is going to be extremely special. So there was that back and forth, and eventually they settled on May of 2024. So Joe Biden's people, they confirmed that Kenya's president, he likes gospel music, he likes country music. They didn't know what Kenyans now know, because you may recall that in the run-up to the previous elections, a lot of people were also smitten by the fact that their potential president is a very godly man, and a huge number of people voted for him. It was partly because of that. So the Americans were now there, realizing that, so he likes gospel music. That's good. We'll ensure when he comes, there's gospel music. Then when they settled on May, they asked themselves, okay, what kind of food should be on the menu? You know, it has to be really, really special. Now, before I go on, that should show you the trouble that America goes through to realize their agenda. They do everything under the sun to ensure that if the agenda is to get this, then they end up getting it.
Yes.
They never take anything for granted. They are super meticulous on how they go about these things. And for the Americans, nothing ever happens just by chance. You know, they are very manipulative in that regard.
Yes.
Imagine a person, you think is your person, but is very manipulative. They know the right buttons to press because they know exactly how you'd react. So the Americans are like that.
Narcissistic.
Exactly. Extremely so. So they discovered that the president likes gospel music, the president likes meat, like most Kenyans. But they wanted now to ensure that the dinner date will have nyama choma with a twist, you know, because they are wooing this person and this country. So on the material day, they built this huge pavilion in the White House lawn so that the dinner would take place in this huge glass pavilion. The reason being, they wanted the Kenyan delegation and all the guests will be there to see the majesty of the sky, you know, to enjoy the nighttime air. Then they arranged for 1,000 candles. You know, this was as romantic as it gets.
It's a dinner.
Yeah. They arranged for 1,000 candles to line this pavilion. Then there was a red carpet leading to the pavilion. Then it was a 3-course meal because they were sparing nothing to ensure that Ruto feels like, man, he's a special bride here, not knowing that he's not really a special bride. All this is supposed to lead to something. So have you ever had, Lynn, of chilled heirloom tomato soup?
Chilled what?
Heirloom tomato soup.
No.
That was the first course. Remember, it's a 3-course meal.
Yes.
So that was the first course. You need to understand why that's a very special soup. Heirloom is something that has been handed over through families for generations. Now, heirloom tomatoes are tomatoes that are openly pollinated.
Yes.
They are not cross-pollinated. They are just like God created them. You know, people have not tampered with them. And then they must stay within a given farm, a given setting for at least 50 years.
Yeah.
So they are very natural, organic, beautiful tomatoes that have a very rich taste. So they are the main ingredient of that particular soup, meaning that it's a very special soup.
Yes.
That's why it's called chilled heirloom tomato soup. Now, Joe Biden lost it a bit there because he didn't do his homework well.
Yes.
Had he done his homework well, he would have known that Kenyans and Africans love their soup hot.
Of course.
You know? So this is chilled soup.
Oh, yo.
This is chilled soup.
Yeah.
I can just imagine William Ruto and his people on the table wondering, why didn't they warm this soup?
Yes.
Not knowing that it's supposed to be chilled soup.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was the first course.
Yeah.
So
this is interesting. Let me tell you why this is interesting.
Yeah.
Because knowing them right now,
Yeah.
they will be, okay, I know this is water, the soup, you gotta use the spoon.
Yeah.
But knowing them, they would be like,
yeah.
Amazing.
Exactly.
This is
But then they're
but deep
texting
down,
each
they're
other.
like, ini,
They're on
bana.
WhatsApp. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was the first course. At least now the main course
Yeah.
restored things.
Okay.
Because there they did their homework well.
Yes.
Anybody who's been to Kenya knows that Kenyans love nyama choma.
Of
That
course.
is grilled beef,
Yes.
grilled meat. So there's something called, Lynn, short beef ribs. Short beef ribs,
Yeah.
it's the part of the cow that has very tender meat. That's why these are short ribs for the beef. And then there's a method of grilling meat that is very, very special, where it's not in direct contact with heat. Now, there's something called, now that you know that, there's something called smoked fruitwood.
Yes.
Fruitwood smoked short beef ribs. To understand that, just...
Did you have to know all these things?
Yeah, because I really want people to see the trouble that Americans
Went
go through
through. Mhm.
and these other superpowers,
Okay.
how they really manipulate Africa through all manner of things.
Fattening the cow
Exactly,
for slaughter.
for slaughter. Yeah. So those short ribs, when they are smoked, there's a special cooking apparatus, a smoker, that now relies on the smoke to grill or to heat this particular beef. Now, they did not just use any other firewood. They had to use fruitwood. You know, this is either apple or peaches, so that those fruit flavors from this wood can be absorbed in the beef, you know. Then it takes about 6 hours.
Yeah.
By the time you're done with that, Lynn, have you ever seen that beef that just drops from the bone? You know, you do this and it's dropping.
Yes.
Can you imagine how President Ruto must have enjoyed that now?
Vizuri sana.
You know,
Yes.
because he's just doing this.
Yeah.
Then he's like, Joe,
Good job.
good job here.
Ugali iko wapi bwana?
Yeah. Just wondering where's ugali anyway.
Yes.
And then they gave him something else he's not used to. Maybe it was a slight blunder on the part of the Americans. Yes, the beef is amazing.
Yes.
It's just dropping from the bones. But they also gave him some seafood that was sort of simmered in butter. This seafood, when you simmer it like that in butter, they call it poached.
Yes.
Butter poached. It's really, really delicious. But for people who are not used to that, you know, you can be like, I'll just stick to the meat.
Yes.
So that was the main course of what they had.
Yeah.
And then after that, there was a third course that entailed a lot of chocolate, melted chocolate with banana flavor, something called banana panache.
Hey, panache.
Yeah.
I'm getting hungry.
Yeah. So the reason I've explained all this is so that people can see what this state dinner entailed. When you're saying state dinner, it's not just a state dinner. It has to be a super special, world-class thing.
Yes.
There were 500 guests there. Amongst them was President Bill Clinton, Secretary Hillary Clinton. You know, the who is who in the American society was amongst these 500. And why were they there, Lynn? Because of Ruto, because of Kenya. You know, this is Kenya's state dinner. So even if it was you, wouldn't you feel extremely special?
Amazing.
That I am the man of the hour.
Amazing. They did all this for me. They are here for me.
Exactly.
You feel important.
You'd feel completely special.
Yeah.
Now, President Obama pulled a first one on Ruto. He's not a big fan. So, but then he's respectful of the fact that this is a state dinner for Kenya. My father was Kenyan. So what President Obama did, he showed up before the dinner came. He showed up technically, but left before the dinner.
Okay.
You know, that was his way of at least respecting Kenya, but without having to stay for the whole thing. Now, as Ruto and the Kenyans were devouring this food, and the Americans, they were listening to the Howard Gospel Choir. The Howard Gospel Choir has been there for decades. It's a black choir.
Yes.
They sing beautiful, powerful music. And remember, Ruto had said that he loves gospel music. So imagine he's devouring this food and just listening to this gospel.
Hallelujah.
You see, that was really amazing.
Yeah.
Now, understand this. The United States of America has an agenda. The United States of America does not look at countries like Kenya and all other African countries and other countries in the global south, does not regard them as partners. Rather, the United States of America regards them as pawns to be used so that they can get what they want. They can checkmate the opponent. The United States of America, if any country ever feels that they're showing me so much love and affection, shock on them, because the US simply wants what it wants. And in this scenario, in that same meeting, later on, Joe Biden then announced after that state dinner that Kenya had been made a major non-NATO ally, the first African country to be given that privilege, supposedly. Now, when you connect the dots, you realize that there's no free lunch and no free dinner for that matter. I'm sure that there are people who thought they were getting free dinners. Now in real life, you know, but those free dinners led to a lot of other stuff. So in this scenario, Kenya then became a major non-NATO ally. In other words, we became a defense partner of America in that elevated status. But what that simply means is that Kenya could now be the country that can be used to do dirty work on the continent, whether it involves trainings or whether it involves in the African Union meetings or in any multilateral setups, when the US needs a voice or an ally, that Kenya could be that country. Hidden that, of course, is the fact that we can be beneficiaries of this defense pact to the US and what have you. But now Kenya was a major non-NATO ally, meaning that Kenya had to be completely in the Americans' corner. It is no surprise that after that, you know, you got to see how Ruto was hanging out with Zelensky and speaking out very forcefully
Yes.
on all pro-US matters,
Yes.
whether it's the Ukraine war or the Israeli conflict, because now Kenya, you know, is the US's to use, you know. I was going to say the US is the B word, but people can
connect the dots.
Exactly, because in reality, that's what Kenya had now become. You see, now that is exactly how America has been dealing with Africa since time immemorial. It's exactly how America has been dealing with us, because even before the pre-independence years, it's America that was buying the slaves, the transatlantic slave trade. It's America that was the perpetrator of that. They were on the other side of the Atlantic receiving these slaves. So yes, they didn't then colonize us 200 years later, but before that, they were still using Africans, literally using Africans. See, then now comes, before I go back to Ruto, then now comes the post-independence years. If you're talking about the Democratic Republic of Congo, when they thought that Lumumba is leaning towards the Soviets, they took him out. When they thought that Kwame Nkrumah, first president of Ghana, he's leaning towards the Soviets, they took him out politically. When they thought that Agostinho Neto, the first president of Angola, was leaning towards the Soviets, they didn't take him out, but what they did, Lynn, is extremely reprehensible. It's unacceptable. America then sponsored a guerrilla movement in Angola that lasted for more than 2 decades, led by Jonas Savimbi. A lot of people died in that particular civil war. They call it civil war, but it wasn't really a civil war. It was just a proxy war between America and the Soviets. If you're talking about Mozambique, it was the same story. Our Kenya's neighbor, Mwalimu Julius Nyerere, he was a champion of socialism. He didn't say that he was a communist. He was just a champion of African socialism. But to the Americans, that was as bad as being in the communist corner. So they frustrated Tanzania's economic growth just because of that. Kenya, on the other hand, was a darling of America for all those years. In 1980, then President Daniel Toroitich arap Moi was also hosted for a state dinner by Jimmy Carter, President Jimmy Carter. In the year 2003, then President Mwai Kibaki was also hosted for a state dinner by George Bush. So you see, why is it that it's just Kenya that they were picking to host for these state dinners? Ruto was not even the first. Had he been a good student of history, he would have known that I am not the first bride to show up here for a state dinner. There was my predecessor before me. There was Moi with Jimmy Carter. There was Kibaki with George W. Bush. And the reason America is then doing all this, you see, is that age-old trick of divide and rule. Because when you have countries like Kenya in your corner, and there are these other countries that you feel are not in your corner, they're either the Soviets or now with the Russians or even with the Chinese. And now that gives you that answer of, now when Ruto, Trump wins the election. And all that is sort of affected. But make no mistake, Lynn, Americans may change presidents, but the American system of exploiting Africa never ever changes. Which is why then they tell Ruto that there are going to be repercussions if you're the Chinese, because they care, because they need Kenya to remain in their corner. Has had 3 visits, Lynn, to China since he became president. And this last visit lasted for 5 days. It lasted for 5 days because he realized that, oh my God, now I have to run into China's arms again. I just have to run into China's arms. And China was more than happy to receive him. And I want to explain why that is the case. China is now the 2nd strongest economy globally. That is why their GDP is at $18 trillion. China is now extremely rich, even though it likes playing both sides, saying that it is a developing country, so it is with Africa and other countries in the south. But China the one thing that China is very, very good at, Lynn, is foresight. They are very, very good in planning, looking 1,000 years into the future, 100 years into the future, which is why now they have the Belt and Road Initiative. For the last decade, more than a decade, this Belt and Road Initiative is simply a mega multi-trillion-dollar project of ensuring that infrastructure-wise and business-wise, they are on top of things. So China simply retraced their steps back to the Silk Route that they used to take like millennia back when they were mainly trading in silk. And Africa, plus Asia, Eurasia, and parts of Europe was a part of that. So the China Belt and Road Initiative is simply the Silk Route 2.0. It's just a contemporary version of that. Because even back then, when America was not existing at all, China was undertaking global trade through this silk trade, which is why in a country like Kenya, if you go to a place like Pate Island in the Lamu Archipelago, you'll find Kenyans who have Chinese ancestry because their ancestors settled on that island in parts of the coast and then intermarried with local Bantu women. And now you have, you know, these Kenyans with Chinese ancestry. And that is living proof of the fact that even back then, China was already having a global agenda of trade. So now they're just doing it at a much larger scale. And Africa, you know, they have 6 corridors in this 2.0, in this current dispensation of the silk trade. Africa, 3 corridors out of that pass through Africa. Because of that, Africa is extremely important.
To them.
Yeah, it's extremely important. China is not funding Africa's infrastructure out of the goodness of their heart. For free? No. Number one, these are loans that we have to pay them back. And I'll talk about that. But number 2, it is also for their own trade. You know, if there's a vibrant trade, say from Lamu to Shanghai in China, they're the beneficiaries of that because it means that they're not going to be reliant on other trade routes. So because of that, China cannot just tell Ruto that you've been flirting with the Americans, they don't want you. They will embrace him with open arms like they did. And just like the Americans, they then claimed that they have given Kenya a special status, the same way that the Americans supposedly gave us, that major non-NATO ally, a special status. In Ruto's recent visit, the Chinese also awarded Kenya some special status, that now because of that special status, we can be able to do things that other countries cannot because ours is a special relationship. But Kenyans need to understand, Ruto needs to understand, Africans need to understand that these so-called special relationships are at best situationships where it is Africa that is losing out. It is them that are gaining. So now with China, Ruto even came back with more loans. And at this point, we have to say that one of the areas that China has completely messed up Africa is through opaque loans, that nobody knows the terms and conditions of those loans, which is why in 2022, Kenya's Parliamentary Investment Committee almost let the cat out of the bag. They tabled a motion in they tabled a report in Parliament that was questioning a clause in Kenya's contractual agreement with China about the SGR loan. For those who don't know, the SGR loan, that is the standard gauge railway, where China is the one that built the railway line from Mombasa to Nairobi. So the loan that financed that, there was a clause there saying that if Kenya defaults, then the port of Mombasa, you know, goes to China. The port of Mombasa was like a security, if you will. So the PIC, the Parliamentary Investment Committee, was questioning that, you know, how could that be there? Then the whole thing died down after a while. I'm sure the powers that be, you know, just poured water on that. But thankfully, it had already come out to the public domain. Some of the details that the Chinese do not want revealed to the Africans were now very clear. So these opaque loans, the people of Africa must rise up and say that, yes, even when we need loans, we are no longer going to accept loans whose terms and conditions are not known to the public, because that is what China excels in. So the people of Kenya must demand to know these recent loans that Ruto was given when he was in China, What are the terms and conditions?
Wow.
What are the terms and conditions? It's unacceptable. Right. First of all, President William Ruto, when you came to power, Africans celebrated you across the board because you were speaking the Pan-African language, and Africa is hungry for such leadership. But lo and behold, a few weeks later, a few months later, you are singing a different tune. And that is something that you have to look deep into your soul, because Africa is a continent and a home to 1.5 billion people. You cannot take 1.5 billion people for a ride. You cannot pay lip service to the people of Africa. You cannot do that. Lives depend on presidents like yourself providing Pan-African transformative leadership. The proof is in the pudding. The only way to know a mango tree is by seeing the mango fruits that are in that tree. Africans thought that they would see in you the mangoes of Pan-Africanism, but instead they have seen the lemons of somebody who behaves like a puppet, somebody who dances to the tune of the highest bidder. That is something that has to stop. You need to look deep into your soul and ask yourself whether this is a legacy that you want to leave behind. Now, to go slightly deeper on why a president would change tune. On the one hand, speak this, but then on the other hand, not really live up, not practice what is preaching. Again, it goes back to the big man syndrome. For too long, Africa has been led by presidents who don't serve the people, but who serve themselves. Presidents who are not transformative leaders. And that is a cancer that Africa will have to address, whether at the ballot box or otherwise. Because this phenomena is not exclusive to Ruto. Africa is full of presidents who say one thing and do another thing. That is why, in the case of Kenya, it stood out because indeed Ruto did come out very strongly to speak about the need of an African currency, an African bank, an African this and that. But lo and behold, when people looked closer, they were able to see that even at a policy level, there was no effort to practice what is preaching. So the simple answer to that is it's just about political expediency. It's purely about political expediency, that these people just want to get political points, but they're not really interested in the hard work that it takes to then provide leadership that will ensure that there's de-dollarization. You know, that is something that we completely support, that there must be de-dollarization. But no African president, at least those who have been there for a while, has then taken the necessary steps. So what the people of Africa are saying, they tell us whether it's in comments or in conversations, the people of Africa are saying that on these critical matters, they themselves now want to provide leadership, and the presidents have to follow, which is why, again, we are challenging all the African countries that have elections this year, countries like Tanzania, to ensure that, if possible, Africans are demanding that they need to put it on the ballot box for their own people to vote on whether they want an all-Africa currency or not, on whether they want to vote on any given Pan-African issue or not. Because when you leave these matters to the presidents, they feel that it's something that is not urgent for them to do, and then they just push it by the wayside because they feel like there's no political mileage to be gained from that.
I love it. Essentially, can the US withdraw whatever support they had accorded Kenya if they see Ruto is singing to the Chinese tune?
They can pretend to do so. But Ruto needs to understand that he also has some, he also has some muscle as a president of Kenya. The reason they cannot turn their back completely on Kenya is where then would they go to? You know, where exactly would they go to? They have spent years cultivating a relationship with Kenya as a special partner in this region. And Kenya needs to use that, because will they then say that, okay, we're not going to Kenya, we're going to Uganda, you know? They will not do that, purely because they have spent a lot of time working on building a strong relationship with Kenya. And what Kenya should then do is to use that to their advantage, completely use that to their advantage, and also make it clear to the US that for us to continue with this relationship, we need ABCD. And Africa can borrow a leaf from China on that matter, because China is no friend of USA at all. But the other day, as we've said before, they reached a tariff agreement with the US because they ensured that their interests were met in this new agreement. So Africa must always be clear on what is the need for us and what we want. And then speak in one voice.
Good.
Because as long as Kenya speaks as a single entity, it's so easy for what has happened to Ramaphosa to then happen to any other country. When the US regards you as a weak African country, they throw their weight around, they become a bully, and that's unacceptable. So this has to be a wake-up call that these African presidents, yes, I know that a United States of Africa is still a long shot. Maybe it's something that may happen a couple of generations down the road. But even at this stage, Lynn, even at this stage, on some matters, these presidents can begin speaking in one voice.
Yes.
And especially when it relates to the countries like America and China bullying us, whether it is through the debts or in the case of America, by simply telling us to shut up, to put up, to sit and we sit, to jump and we jump. It's unacceptable. It's totally unacceptable. I think African women will very quickly understand what I'm about to say.
Okay.
And I hope that the guys will then quickly follow suit. If there's ever been a time when a lady asked a guy, where is this relationship leading to? That's a very loaded question.
That's your cue.
It's a really loaded question.
Yes.
That no guy usually wants to get that question, you know, because the lady can see that you're investing time, you're even investing money, and you're investing a lot, but 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, you people are just there, you know. So she has a right to then ask exactly where we go headed with this. Africa must ask Russia that question. Africa must ask Russia that question because Russia likes saying that they stood with Africa during the colonial days. It is true that they didn't colonize any African country. It is true that they spoke out against the imperialists, the colonizers. It is true that they did all that. But it is also true that they didn't give Patrice Lumumba the support, the military support he needed. Had they given him that support, Lumumba would not have died, you know, in the crazy way that he died. In his own country, the CIA and the Belgians would not have colluded with the local corrupt ruling elite in Congo to take out Lumumba if Russia had actually given him the military support he needed. Now, before some of you begin to say that, are you now against Russia? I challenge you to just look at history. Look at, did Russia provide Lumumba with military support or not? Go back to history and dig for yourself. If you find that they didn't provide him with support, that should tell you something. Now, why that is important for this conversation is this. We are not denying that Africa is by and large in some kind of relationship with Russia today that is way better than the relationship that many Africans have with the West, because it is practically non-existent in many African countries. But just remember that question. Where is this relationship leading to? Russia must answer that question. Let me give you some facts here. Russia has had 2 Russia-Africa summits. One was in 2019 in Sochi. The next one was in 2024 in St. Petersburg. During the one that was in Sochi, the agreement was that within 5 years, they were supposed to double the trade between Russia and Africa.
Yes.
At that time, it stood at $18 billion. It was supposed to double within 5 years. Do you know it hasn't doubled? It is still there. It's exactly where it was back in 2019. Africa's trade with Russia is exactly where it was in 2019 when we came up with that resolution back then. Which is why I started by saying that if Russia's GDP per capita at the moment is way higher than Africa's, and if we need to improve our $2,000 GDP per capita to at least go higher to the 5 digits, $10,000 and above, how is Russia contributing to that? That's what Africans should ask themselves. They can contribute to that through better trade. They can contribute to that through skills transfer. And again, this one I need to even say it because I know that a number of fellow Africans are immediately going to, as we say in Kenya, catch feelings right now and feel as if now we're against Russia. No, we are not against Russia. We are for Africa. and every country that stands by Africa. Russia at the moment politically is standing by Africa, morally is standing by Africa. But we're saying that they have to step up their game in terms of standing by Africa economically. They have to step up their game completely.
Yes.
You know, Russia has signed 43 military agreements with African countries. 43, Lynn. But you know how many economic agreements they have signed with African countries? They're not as many. They're not as elaborate at all. Russia at the moment can actually help Africa in terms of energy.
Yeah.
And when we talk about skills transfer, even Ibrahim Traore himself told Vladimir Putin to his face when he met Putin a few weeks ago. Traore told him to his face that now we need skills transfer. He did. Fellow Africans need to dig up that video and see for themselves. Because one of the challenges that is now in Africa is that sometimes when you speak these things on Russia, a sizable percentage of fellow Africans imagine that now we are against Russia, meaning that we are pro-West. Yes. And I always remind them what Kwame Nkrumah said, that we face neither East nor West, but we face forward. So Traore himself, if Traore himself told Putin to his face that now Burkina Faso needs skills transfer, then who are you to feel as if, are you then going to accuse Traore of being pro-West just because he's told Putin that? And Traore himself was very explicit on that. Mm-hmm. Very, very explicit on that.
Yeah.
Traore himself has in recent months said that entities like the European Union, they have their embassies in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso, because he is also cognizant of the fact that Africa must be able to move forward, and Africa will move forward with people who respect, he uses that word a lot, who respect Africa. And Russia, to its credit, respects Africa, does not push us around. All we're saying is, where is this relationship headed towards? When Kenya's President William Ruto was hosted for the state dinner by then President Joe Biden, at the end of it all, Joe Biden gave him a gift. It was a very special gift, and this gift was Martin Luther King Jr.'s book, The Trumpet of Conscience. I would like to remind William Ruto to read chapter 3 of that book. That chapter is entitled Youth and Social Change. When you read that chapter, you'll find a place where Martin Luther eloquently discusses the matter of structural change and explains that the structures that were in place in America at the time were at the heart of the poverty that Black Americans were facing. When you then proceed to chapter 4, you'll find Martin Luther talking about economic injustices as being extremely responsible for the plight of African Americans at the time. The reason I mentioned that book is, number one, The Trumpet of Conscience. Donald Trump, Xi Jinping, Vladimir Putin, and all these leaders of Turkey, of the United Arab Emirates, these new colonizer wannabes, they need to understand that the trumpet of conscience is now blowing out of Africa, because the people of Africa are completely tired of these shenanigans, of this nonsense that has been going on for years. They are tired of neocolonialism and of imperialist behavior. The trumpet of conscience is now blowing extremely loudly. But beyond the trumpet of conscience, everybody should understand, whether you are USA, China, Russia, European Union, whoever you are, you should understand that Africans are now demanding structural changes, as Martin Luther King eloquently captured there. And amongst these structural changes is the de-dollarization of the global economy. Even if the African presidents are not working hard on these structural changes, the people of Africa are saying that they are going to take matters into their own hands. They are going to ensure that the global order, the structural changes that are needed for Africa to get ahead as it's supposed to, they are going to ensure that it happens. So I simply conclude by making it very clear that the trumpet of conscience is going to blow even louder, and Africans are going to speak out even more. But more importantly, they're going to take action a lot more.